Chapter 1. Blood on the sidewalk. Rain fell in tired sheets over Brooklyn, slicking the pavement and turning alleyways into glistening veins of darkness. It was past midnight, the city's usual hum replaced with the distant rattle of a subway and the soft shuffle of rats hunting scraps. Somewhere behind a row of closed-up shops and shuttered bodegas, a figure stumbled, then collapsed. 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐜𝐫𝐸's breath hitched, his vision tunneling. Blood soaked through the fabric of his black shirt, warm and relentless. His ribs screamed with every shallow inhale. Somewhere in the blur of neon signs and street lamp halos, he registered his failure. The hit had gone sideways. The rookie panicked. Too much noise. Too much blood. And now, he was dying. Alone. He dragged himself a few more feet before his body gave out completely. Slumping against the graffitied wall of a deserted alley. Amelia Hart didn't believe in fate. She believed in routine, in triple-checking EKGs, and in carrying spare granola bars for nurses too busy to eat. But tonight, something tugged at her chest as she turned onto Maple Avenue after a double shift at Brooklyn General. Her scrubs clung to her tired frame, damp from the rain. A thermos of cold tea bumped against her bag with each step. She'd taken this shortcut 100 times, but tonight her steps slowed when she spotted a dark shape near the garbage bins. Not trash. A man. "Hey," she called, instinct already pushing her forward. "Sir, can you hear me?" The man didn't move. Amelia knelt beside him, ignoring the cold water seeping into her knees. Her hands moved fast, checking pulse, breath, injuries. Her training kicked in, but her heart pounded harder than it should have. His pulse was steady. A gunshot wound, low on his left side. Another graze along his shoulder. He was soaked, unconscious, and heavy with something she couldn't name. Danger, maybe. But there was also something vulnerable in his brow, twisted in pain. "God," she whispered. "What the hell happened to you?" She should call 911. Let the paramedics handle it. Let the system take over. But something stopped her. Something in his face. Too calm for a junkie, too clean for a homeless man, too broken to be left behind. He needed help now, and her clinic was 2 blocks away. With effort, she didn't know she had left. Amelia slipped his arm over her shoulder and hauled him up, inch by inch. He groaned faintly, but his weight sagged like dead muscle. "Come on, big guy," she muttered, teeth clenched. "You better not die on me tonight." By the time she reached the back entrance of the clinic, her home above it, Amelia's legs trembled with strain. She kicked the door open, maneuvered him onto the treatment bed with practiced hands, unlocked the door behind them. Blood streaked the floor. She turned on the overhead light, rolled up her sleeves, and got to work. The man on her table didn't stir. For the first time in years, her hands shook. She'd patched up gang victims before, even a stabbing or two from her earlier days. But never someone like this. Never in her own space. Never this kind of quiet tension radiating from a man who looked like he'd walked out of someone's nightmare and landed in her arms. She cleaned the wound, stitched the worst of it, and pressed gauze firm against the rest. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the beep of her portable vitals monitor and the soft whistle of his breath. When she finally peeled off her gloves, Amelia stood over him and studied his face. Sharp jaw, dark stubble, a bruise blooming near his temple. He looked younger, asleep. Human, wounded, alone, she sighed, pulled a blanket over him, and switched off the harsh light. Just for tonight, she told herself. Just until he wakes up. Tomorrow, she'd figure out who this stranger was and why he was bleeding on her floor. Chapter 2. A stranger in her spare room. Smell of antiseptic clung to the morning. Sunlight fought its way through the blinds of the clinic's upstairs room, casting pale gold streaks across the modest space. Amelia stirred her coffee with one hand, the other still trembling faintly from last night's chaos. She hadn't slept, not really. Instead, she'd hovered between worrying and disbelief, checking the stranger's vitals every hour. Now, he lay still in the makeshift bed she'd set up in the spare room, adjacent to her private quarters. His wounds were stable, pulse stronger, breathing steady, but the questions pulsed louder than his heartbeat. Who was he? Why had he been left bleeding in a back alley with a bullet wound and no ID? She took a cautious sip of coffee, listening for any sound, then turned at the soft creak of the floorboards. He was awake. His dark eyes blinked slowly, taking in the sterile walls, the white sheets, and finally, "You're not dead," she said quietly, trying to sound clinical. His voice was a low rasp. "Not yet." She stepped forward, setting her mug down on a tray. "You lost a lot of blood. You were shot. I cleaned the wounds. But you need rest." He tried to sit up, grimaced, failed. "Where is this?" "My clinic," she said. "Upstairs. I live here." He didn't respond, just stared at her, like he was trying to decide if she was real, or if this was some elaborate trap. "No police, no questions," she said, folding her arms. "For now." His brow arched faintly. "You a doctor?" "A nurse," she corrected. 15 years. Now I run this place." "You're lucky I found you." "Lucky," he echoed, as if the word was foreign on his tongue. A soft knock interrupted them. Amelia turned, her heart skipping. She opened the door just a crack, revealing her teenage son, Noah, with his backpack slung over one shoulder and a puzzled look on his face. "Hey, Mom, I just got back from Dad's. Why is there blood on the stairs?" Amelia stepped into the hallway quickly, pulling the door closed behind her. "I'll explain later. Just, someone needed help." Noah tilted his head, suspicious. "What kind of help?" "The kind you don't ask questions about," she said gently, brushing his hair back. "I'll talk to you after school, okay? Grab a granola bar on the way out." He studied her for a moment, then sighed. "Okay. But this is weird. Mom, welcome to Brooklyn," she muttered under her breath when she returned to the room. The man's eyes were closed again, but she could tell he wasn't asleep. His hand had curled around the edge of the blanket, tension in every tendon. "I'll need a name," she said. Softly, he didn't open his eyes. "Can't give you one." "Then I'll call you John Doe. Seems fitting." His lips twitched, just barely. "Call me whatever you want." Amelia sat down in the chair beside him, watching his chest rise and fall. The danger hadn't left the room. She felt it like static in the air. But so had something else, vulnerability. Whatever life this man had lived, it had nearly ended on her doorstep. And something about that pulled at her in ways she didn't understand yet. "Rest," she said finally. "But if you move before you're ready, you'll reopen everything I stitched. And then I'll really be annoyed." For the first time, his mouth curved into something faintly resembling a smile. It didn't last. She left him there. The door cracked just enough to hear him if he called. She didn't trust him, but she didn't want him to die either. Chapter 3. Shadows and terrain tapped softly at the window panes as evening fell over Brooklyn, casting long shadows across the clinic's walls. The rhythm of life outside, honking horns, muffled music from a passing car felt distant inside Amelia's small upstairs apartment. A hush had settled over the space, fragile and uncertain, like a truce between strangers who hadn't yet decided what they were to each other. Amelia poured hot water over chamomile leaves and let the steam rise into her tired face. She hadn't planned on making tea, but after checking on her mystery patient for the third time that afternoon and finding him still awake, she needed something to hold in her hands, something warm to balance the strange chill he brought with him. The man who still refused to give a name was healing faster than she expected. His color had returned, the fever was gone, and he'd eaten the soup she'd left without a word of thanks. But there was something else shifting between them now, an awareness. He watched her more closely, with sharp eyes that missed nothing but gave away even less. "Can I ask you something?" she said finally, stepping into the spare room where he now sat propped against a pillow, blanket over his lap. He glanced at her, then the tea in her hands. "That for me." "I don't poison strangers," she replied, handing him the mug. His fingers brushed hers just briefly, and she was surprised at the calluses, the strength. He didn't look like a patient now. He looked like a man who'd been waiting for something worse than pain. "You can ask," he said. "Doesn't mean I'll answer." She pulled the chair closer and sat. "Why didn't you go to a hospital?" His jaw tightened. "Didn't have the luxury." "That's not a real answer." "It's the only one I've got." She exhaled slowly. watching him sip the tea. His movements were controlled, measured to practice for someone just out of surgery. He carried danger like it was part of his skin. But there was no threat in his posture, not toward her. Just caution, wariness, like he was still deciding if she was a threat to him. "You're not the first man I've patched up," she said quietly. "But you're the first one who said so little after I saved his life." He looked at her, really looked. "I didn't ask you to." "No, but you didn't stop me either." That earned her a flicker of something in his gaze. Guilt, gratitude. She couldn't tell. He set the mug down on the side table, careful not to spill. "I don't know what to say to someone who's kind," he said. "It's not something I'm used to." Her throat caught for a moment. There was a story behind that sentence, thick with bruises and regret. She didn't press. Instead, she offered a softer truth. "Well, I'm not always kind. I just didn't want you dying in my hallway." That got the smallest smile out of him. Not warm, but real. "What about you?" he asked. "Why risk yourself for a stranger?" She hesitated. The truth was too big to answer in one line. Too tangled in the years she'd spent healing everyone but herself. "Because once," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "someone didn't help me. And I know what that kind of silence feels like." He didn't speak again, but something in his shoulders eased, just slightly. The room was quiet, but not uncomfortable. Just quiet the way two people might share a space when words start to matter less than presence. She left him, with the last of the tea, and closed the door behind her. He hadn't told her who he was. But for the first time, he hadn't looked like a ghost trying to disappear. Chapter 4. A nurse, a mother. A fortress next morning arrived with sunlight, so bright it made the dust on Amelia's windows shimmer like gold flecks. But she barely noticed. Her day had begun before the sun. Before the city stirred, packing her son's lunch, reviewing patient charts, and checking on the stranger still recovering in her spare room. She was a woman who'd learned to live in motion. Stillness, for her, was dangerous. Stillness meant remembering. Downstairs, the clinic opened with the soft chime of the front door. Amelia greeted patients, wrapped sprained wrists, and listened to coughs and whispered worries. But every few minutes, her mind drifted upward too, the man with shadows in his eyes and secrets stitched into his skin. Upstairs, Jace sat up slowly, muscles aching. The pain was dull now, manageable. But what wasn't manageable was the quiet buzz beneath his skin. The way this place, this woman, was starting to gnaw at the parts of him he thought had died. There was a rhythm here, a life. The sound of a mother humming while folding towels. The creak of a floorboard under her steps. A boy's voice drifting in from another room. He shouldn't be here, but he hadn't moved. That afternoon, Amelia returned upstairs with a tray grilled cheese, tomato soup, and a bottle of water. She barely looked at him as she set it down, but her movements were precise, habitual, practiced in a way that made her feel uncheckable. "I added turmeric to the soup," she said. "Anti-inflammatory. I've had worse," he replied after the first spoonful. A wry smile tugged at her lips. "That's the nicest thing you've said all week." Jace watched her sit across from him again, noticed the tiny crease between her brows that hadn't relaxed since the day they met. She carried a weariness that went deeper than fatigue, a weariness forged from carrying more than her fair share of pain and never letting it show. "Your son," he said suddenly. "He okay with all this?" She blinked, caught off guard. "Noah's 17. He's seen me treat all kinds of people. Homeless vets, kids from the shelter, a guy who tried to stitch his own arm with fishing line." Jace arched a brow. "And me. You're different," she said. Then, softer, "But I told him you're not a threat, and he trusts me." That struck deeper than she expected. Trust wasn't a word Jace heard often. It certainly wasn't a word he deserved. "He's a good kid," Jace murmured. "Smart, got your eyes." Amelia looked down, stirring her tea absent-mindedly. "He's everything I ever did right." There was a silence between them, one heavy with the ghosts neither of them named. And then she added, almost too quietly to hear, "His father left when he was 4. Ran off with someone younger. No warning. No goodbyes, just gone. Jace's fingers tightened around the soup spoon. I didn't date after that, she continued, as if admitting it aloud might make it less heavy. Didn't want to bring more chaos into Noah's life. So I built a routine. A safe one. A fortress, Jace said. Her gaze snapped to his dot. He didn't flinch. You built a fortress, Amelia. One only the bleeding seemed to get past. Something shifted in her chest, uncomfortable and raw. She stood, collecting the tray, trying not to meet his eyes. Well, lucky you. You came in gushing blood. As she turned to leave, his voice stopped her. I didn't mean to stay, he said quietly. But I'm starting to see why I did. She paused in the doorway, shoulders tense, breath caught somewhere in the space between fear and something far more dangerous. Hope. Chapter 5. An assassin with a hearth. Evening had settled into one of those quiet Brooklyn lullabies. Distant traffic, the rustle of wind through fire escapes, and the soft hum of life behind closed apartment windows. Amelia stood at her kitchen counter, slicing apples for a snack, pretending not to notice that the man she'd patched back from the edge of death was leaning against the frame of the doorway, watching her. He looked stronger today. The bruising on his face was fading, and he moved with the wariness of someone who didn't like being vulnerable. Even when it was obvious he still hurt. His t-shirt clung to his chest, still loose around the ribs, but the strength in his posture had returned. There was control in him again, yet something gentler now lingered in his eyes. Noah's late, he said. Amelia glanced up. School project. Group work. They're meeting at a friend's house. Jace gave a faint nod and stepped farther into the room. He moved slowly, like he didn't want to startle the fragile peace that had formed between them. Need help with anything? He asked. She blinked. You offering to slice apples? I've handled sharper things. She almost laughed, despite herself, and slid the cutting board toward him. Here, prove it. He took the knife with practiced ease. His movements clean, precise. Not a word said, but she saw it how the blade felt familiar in his grip, like an extension of himself. It made her chest tighten. He wasn't just any man recovering from a wound. He'd seen violence, probably lived in it. You've done this before, she said quietly. 𝐾𝐿, he asked. No, she replied, meeting his gaze. Protecting yourself. He looked down, focused on the rhythm of the blade. It's not just myself I've protected. The silence between them thickened, but it wasn't cold. It was layered with things left unsaid. After a few moments, he handed her a bowl of neatly sliced apples. She smiled faintly. Not bad. Don't sound so surprised. That evening, Noah came home with a tired smile and an armful of poster board for his science presentation. Jace sat on the edge of the couch, bandaged ribs shifting uncomfortably, watching as the teen set up on the living room floor. You working on gravity? Jace asked. Noah looked up, surprised. Kinda. It's about physics in everyday life. Try the trajectory of a thrown object, Jace said, without missing a beat. You know why a baseball flies different than a football? Or a knife? Amelia nearly dropped her tea. Noah lit up. That's actually really cool. Wait. How do you know all that? Jace hesitated. Used to help my uncle with mechanics, angles, force, timing. Kind of sticks in your brain. Noah nodded, already scribbling notes. Later, when Noah went to shower, Amelia turned to Jace, arms crossed. You helped him, she said softly. He's smart. Just needed a different way to look at it. She tilted her head, watching him with something that wasn't suspicion anymore, something closer to admiration. He likes you, I noticed, he said, a flicker of amusement in his voice. Does that bother you? No, she said honestly. That scares me. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, low and steady, I don't want to hurt you. Or him. Amelia's throat tightened. I don't know who you are, she whispered, but I keep seeing pieces of someone who could be. Good. Jace looked away, jaw tight. I used to be someone else. Maybe he's still in there. They stood in the quiet for a long moment, her fortress beginning to crack, his shadows beginning to shift, and somewhere between fear and forgiveness, something tender began to bloom. Chapter 6. A cold night. A warm kitchen storm arrived with no warning, thick snow swirling like ash outside the clinic's windows, wind howling down the alley like it was chasing ghosts. The power flickered once, then again, before finally surrendering altogether. Darkness swallowed the rooms in a hush, save for the soft ticking of Amelia's wall clock and the slow crackle of the emergency space heater in the kitchen. Amelia lit a candle and set it on the table, its golden glow dancing against the glass. Jace sat across from her, his silhouette cut sharp in the dim light. He had offered to fix the generator earlier, but she'd seen the wince when he reached too far and insisted he sit down instead. "It's like Brooklyn forgot how to do winter," she murmured, pouring the last of the red wine into two chipped mugs. "Or maybe it just needed an excuse to trap us in here," Jace replied, his voice low and warmer than usual. She handed him a mug. Their fingers brushed again, longer this time, deliberate in a way neither of them acknowledged. Not out loud. Amelia sat down and pulled her cardigan tighter around her shoulders. "When I was a kid, snow nights meant grilled cheese and stories by flashlight. My mom made the worst cocoa, but always swore it was gourmet." Jace let out a soft huff of amusement. "My snow nights meant waiting for the pipes to freeze and hoping the landlord didn't shut off the heat again." She tilted her head, surprised. "You grew up here, Queens, then bounced around. Foster homes, mostly. Got out young. Made myself useful." The way he said it, "made myself useful," carried weight. No self-pity, just fact. "You don't have to tell me everything," she said gently, "but you should know this isn't a confession booth. You're allowed to just be here." He looked at her for a long moment, like he didn't quite know how to respond to kindness spoken so plainly. They ate in silence for a while, warm bread, sharp cheese, the occasional clink of utensils. Outside, the storm beat on, indifferent to the fragile peace inside the kitchen. "I don't remember the last time I had dinner with someone who wasn't trying to get something from me," he said. Finally, she looked up. "What do you think I want?" He leaned back, eyes steady. "I think you want me to remember I'm human." Amelia's breath caught. There it was, that thread between them, growing taut and undeniable. She didn't say anything, just reached across the table and set her hand gently on his. He stilled. His eyes dropped to the connection. Callous fingers, steady but hesitant, curled around hers. The room shrank until there was nothing but the two of them, two souls who didn't ask to collide, finding quiet comfort in the accident. Amelia rose slowly, circled the table, and knelt beside him. Her hand moved to his cheek, resting lightly against the stubble and the jagged scar beneath his eye. "You're warm," she whispered. His breath hitched. "I don't feel like I deserve this." "Most people don't," she said, "but that doesn't mean they shouldn't get it." He turned his face into her palm. For a moment, it felt like time held its breath. Then, just before the candle flickered to low, he lifted his hand and covered hers with his own. They stayed like that, saying nothing, wrapped in a silence more intimate than any words. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, warmth grew. Chapter 7. Lines crossed. Morning sunlight filtered through the frosted windows, touching everything with a kind of gentle gold that made the kitchen softer, safer. But the glow couldn't reach the tangle of thoughts in Amelia's mind. She moved quietly, pouring coffee into mismatched mugs, the memory of the night before still sitting in her chest like an ember. She shouldn't have touched him, and yet she couldn't forget how his cheek felt beneath her palm, how he hadn't flinched from her hand but leaned into it, like a man starved for warmth. She was a nurse, a mother, a woman who had built a steady life from the rubble of old heartbreak, and he was a mystery stitched together by shadows and silence. She should have drawn a line. Instead, she crossed it. "Smells like coffee," Jace murmured from the doorway, his voice still raspy from sleep. She turned and nearly dropped the pot. He wasn't wearing a shirt, just a bandage around his torso and a pair of drawstring pants that sat low on his hips. His hair was mussed. He looked more man than assassin in that moment, and that made him all the more dangerous. Amelia cleared her throat and shoved a mug toward him. "Put a shirt on. I've got a teenage son." Jace smirked. "Right, wouldn't want to be a bad influence." She rolled her eyes, but her heart skipped a beat anyway. They drank in silence for a while. Not awkward silence, charged silence. Every breath between them seemed to say, "Do you feel it too?" Noah had left early for school, and the apartment was still and quiet. Wrapped in the hush of early morning, Jace stepped closer. "About last night. I shouldn't have." He cut her off, his voice low. "Don't take it back." Amelia looked up at him, eyes wide. "You don't know me." "I know enough." Her defenses wavered. "You're still healing. You don't even know if you're staying." "I'm not going anywhere today," he said simply. It was a ridiculous thing to do, but in that moment, it felt inevitable, like trying to stop the tide. He reached out, cupped her face gently with both hands, and leaned in. The kiss was slow, intentional, not hungry or wild, just quiet, like he was memorizing the shape of her mouth. She didn't stop him. She couldn't. Her hands gripped the fabric at his sides, the heat of him radiating through her palms. When they parted, breathless, neither spoke right away. Then Amelia stepped back, her gaze shaken. "We can't do this. I know." She hugged her arms around herself. "I have a son, a life I've built with care. I can't risk it, not for someone who won't even tell me their name." Jace looked like he wanted to speak, to explain, but he did in single quotes instead. He nodded once. A slow, heavy motion. "I'll stay out of your way," he said softly. She turned away. Before he could see the conflict in her eyes, the line had been crossed, and now they had to figure out how to live with it. Chapter 8. The past knocks. Day began with an eerie kind of calm, the kind that made Amelia uneasy. The air in the clinic felt too still, like the world was holding its breath. Jace had kept his word, keeping his distance since the kiss. He stayed in the spare room mostly, moving only when necessary. His presence ghost-like but undeniable. Amelia busied herself with patients, cleaning wounds and offering fruit shots, anything to keep her thoughts from wandering back to him. But no amount of work could quiet the echo of that kiss, the feel of his hands, the way her heart had betrayed her sense of reason. By late afternoon, the sky darkened with heavy clouds. She stood by the front desk, scribbling notes, when the bell over the clinic door jingled softly. A man stepped inside. He was average in height, clean cut, but his eyes were sharp to sharp. He scanned the clinic with practiced calculation before offering a tight smile. "Looking for someone," he said. "Friend of mine. Might have passed through here recently." Amelia felt it immediately, the chill that crept up her spine. "We're a medical clinic, not a hostel. People come in sick. They leave well. We don't collect names." The man tilted his head. "You sure about that?" Before she could answer, he reached into his coat pocket, not for a gun, but something more unnerving. A small photograph, folded, slightly blood-stained. It was Jace alive, but clearly injured. The man slid it across the counter. "If you see him," he said quietly, "tell him Dante says hello." Amelia kept her face calm as ice. "I don't know who that is." The man gave her a knowing look, then turned and walked out, the door jingling behind him like a warning bell. She locked the front door the moment he was gone, heart pounding. The past Jace refused to speak of had finally caught up, and it had knocked with a smile. Upstairs, she found him standing at the window, watching the street below. She hadn't made a sound coming up, but he turned to her as if he already knew. "Who was he?" she asked, holding out the photo. Jace stared at it, his jaw clenched, his knuckles whitening. "Someone from a life I never meant to bring here." Her voice trembled, just slightly. Too late. He took the photo, folded it once, then tucked it into his pocket like it didn't burn. "I'll go," he said. "No." Amelia's voice was firm, unexpected even to herself. "You don't just bleed out on my table. Kiss me, and disappear when things get hard." His eyes darkened. "Amelia, tell me the truth," she whispered. "Tell me who you are, what you've done. Let me choose what I want to risk." Jace looked at her like a man drowning in a sea of his own making. "You don't want that." "I'm not afraid of blood," she said. "I'm afraid of lies." For the first time, something cracked in him, not just frustration, but sorrow. Deep, aching regret. "I was sent to kill someone that night," he said. "But I didn't. The job went wrong. They turned on me." He paused, eyes searching hers. "I've done terrible things. I've taken lives. And I don't know if someone like me deserves any of this," she exhaled, heart thudding painfully. "Then stay," she said quietly, "and prove you can be someone different." They stood inches apart, both shaped by wounds the other hadn't yet seen. But for now, they faced them together, even if the storm was only just beginning. Chapter 9. Truth hurts, but so does love. Silence in the room was suffocating. Jace stood in the center of Amelia's kitchen, the overhead light flickering slightly as wind whispered against the windows. His shirt clung to him, damp from the cold. His eyes, usually so guarded, were raw now, unmasked. Amelia leaned against the counter, arms folded tightly across her chest, trying to steady her breath. "Say it again," she whispered. "All of it." He didn't look away. "I've killed people, Amelia. I've worked for men who don't leave room for choice. The night you found me, I was supposed to end someone's life. But something changed. I couldn't do it. They turned on me for hesitating. That's why I was bleeding in your alley." She gripped the edge of the counter, the weight of his confession crushing down like a wave. The truth had always been close coiled in his silences, etched in his scars, but hearing it made everything sharper. "Were you ever going to tell me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I didn't want to drag you into it," he said. "I thought if I left soon enough, you and Noah would be safe. But you stayed. I couldn't leave." Amelia's laugh was brittle. "Because of what? Guilt? Gratitude?" His eyes flashed. "No, because of you." That stopped her, but only for a moment. She stepped away from the counter, pacing the small kitchen. "I let you into my home. I let my son sit across from you, laugh with you, trust you. And now I find out you've lived a life built on death. Do you have any idea what kind of danger you've brought to our doorstep?" "I do," he said quietly. "That's why I need to go." She shook her head. "Don't turn this into something noble. This isn't about protecting us, it's about protecting yourself from having to feel." He took a slow breath. "You think I don't feel? I haven't felt this much in years, Amelia. You and Noah. You gave me something I thought was long gone. You made me want more." Tears welled in her eyes, hot and furious. "And now what? You think a few good intentions undo everything that came before? You think I can just tuck you into my life like this is some fairy tale?" "No," he said, voice breaking. "I don't think I deserve that." She looked at him, really looked. The man who had bled on her floor. The man who helped her son with science projects. Who made tea without asking. Who kissed her like she was something holy. But he was also the man who'd taken lives. Her chest tightened. "I need you to leave, Jace." His face didn't change, but something in his eyes dimmed. He nodded once. "I'm sorry," he said, "for everything." He turned toward the door, moving with the weight of someone who'd finally run out of second chances. Amelia stood there, arms wrapped around herself, shaking. He didn't ask her to stop him, and she didn't, not this time. The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded far too much like goodbye. Chapter 10. Silence between Hart's days blurred into one another, grey and hollow. The sound of Jace's boots no longer echoed down the clinic staircase. His tea mug sat untouched on the shelf, and Amelia moved through her days like a woman on autopilot. She woke early, made Noah's breakfast, opened the clinic, saw patients, cleaned, and repeated it all again the next day. But something had shifted. The warmth that used to linger in her home had been replaced by a silence that pressed in at the edges like a bruise she couldn't touch without wincing. Noah noticed first. He didn't ask questions, but his eyes lingered longer when he passed Jace's empty room, and his voice lacked its usual lightness. "Is he okay?" he asked one night, stirring his dinner around his plate without taking a bite. Amelia didn't look up. "I don't know. Did you tell him to leave?" She nodded slowly. "Did you want him to?" Her hand paused on her fork. For a moment, she couldn't speak. "I wanted to protect us," she said at last, her voice soft and cracked around the edges. "I didn't know what else to do." Noah didn't press. He just stood and started clearing the table. That night, after the dishes were done, and the house had fallen quiet, Amelia found herself standing outside the spare room. The bed was still made, his pillow untouched since he'd left. She ran her hand over the blanket, 1,000 unsaid words tightening in her throat. She missed him. She missed his stillness in the mornings, the way he watched her like she was something fragile. Not because she was weak, but because he didn't want to break something he didn't know how to fix. But most of all, she missed the feeling that someone saw her. The woman beneath the scrubs, beneath the duty and routine. Jace had seen her, and now he was gone, across town. Jace sat in a dingy rented room above a shuttered auto shop, the walls bare except for the peeling paint. He hadn't unpacked. There wasn't much to unpack anyway. He stared at the ceiling most nights, counting the cracks like they could distract him from the ache that had settled in his chest since the moment he walked out of her life. He'd thought disappearing would make her safer. He hadn't expected it to make him feel like a ghost. Sometimes, he reached for the pen and paper on the nightstand. He'd start a letter, then stop halfway through. What could he say that wouldn't reopen wounds? Still, he wrote them, and never sent a single one to people. One city dot, and the silence between them that neither of them knew how to break. Chapter 11. Letters never sent. Pen hovered above the paper, trembling slightly in Jace's scarred hand. He stared at the blank page for so long it blurred. Outside the small window of his rented room, the city moved on, sirens in the distance, footsteps echoing in alleys, life continuing like it hadn't come to a halt for him the moment Amelia told him to leave. He finally pressed the tip to the page and wrote, "Amelia, you told me to leave. I heard the words, but I think I was already gone long before that. I just didn't want to admit it." He paused, then scratched out the last sentence. Too dramatic, too honest. He crumpled the page and reached for another. "I wanted to thank you for saving my life, for not asking questions when you should have, for giving me a place that felt like something close to home, even if just for a while." Again, he hesitated. Too distant, too formal. He tossed that one to night after night. Jace sat at the desk by the window, writing fragments of letters, half-truths, almost confessions, quiet apologies folded into sentences he couldn't bear to send. Each one ended the same way, unsigned, unsent, and buried in the drawer beside his bed. Some days, he walked the long way to the coffee shop near the clinic, hoping to catch a glimpse of her through the glass. He never got close enough. He didn't dare, but he saw her once bundled in a grey coat, hair tied up, talking to a young mother holding a sick toddler. Amelia's hand rested gently on the child's back, her face calm, patient, and so painfully familiar. She hadn't changed. She was still the same woman who had stitched his wounds and stirred his tea, and looked him in the eyes like he was worth saving. And he was still the man who didn't know how to be anyone else. But slowly, something inside him was shifting. The first time he'd held a gun, he was 17. By 20, he'd stopped flinching at the recoil. Now, for the first time in his life, he flinched at the memory of her voice saying his name. He wanted to be better, not just for her, for himself, for the boy who once dreamed of escape, and the man who finally saw what freedom might look like in a woman's kitchen. So he started planning, asking questions, visiting places in shadows where he used to belong, listening without revealing too much. He needed to know if there was a way out, if the chains of his past could be broken without dragging Amelia and Noah down with him. He wasn't sure if redemption was real, but he knew he wanted to try, and so the letters stayed in the drawer, unopened and unsent, because he wasn't ready to return. Not yet. Not until he could walk through her door without blood on his hands. Not until he could be the man she deserved. Chapter 12. The fire within smoke, thick, black, and fast curling up the walls of the clinic like claws. The fire alarm shrieked above Amelia's head as she yanked open the back exit, shouting for Noah to stay close. Flames licked at the far end of the hallway, swallowing exam tables and supply cabinets with terrifying hunger. She had only stepped out for groceries. 15 minutes. That's all it took for her world to begin burning. Noah clutched her hand, coughing hard. His eyes were wide with panic. His hoodie pulled over his nose. "Mom, what's happening?" "I don't know," she said, choking on the truth and the smoke. "We have to move, now." They darted through the side alley, Amelia's keys clanging at her hip as she kicked open the fence gate. Sirens wailed in the distance, but it was the smell, sharp and acidic, that made her heart pound the hardest. This wasn't an accident. It smelled of accelerant. Someone had meant for this to happen. By the time they reached the sidewalk, the fire trucks were already pulling in. Amelia stood there shivering, watching her clinic, the space she'd built from nothing, go up in flames. And that's when she saw him. Jace. He was across the street, jaw clenched, his coat whipping in the wind. He wasn't supposed to be there. She hadn't seen him in weeks, but his eyes locked onto hers with a look that was both relief and agony. "Amelia," he shouted, crossing the street in long, urgent strides. She was too stunned to move. He reached her, cupping her face in his hands, scanning her quickly for injuries. "Are you okay?" "Is Noah?" "I'm fine," she breathed. "He's okay. We got out. How did you?" "I heard something," he said, voice tight. "I was nearby, saw the smoke. I had to make sure." Her lip trembled as she looked over her shoulder at the blaze. "Everything's gone. I know," he said softly. "And I'm sorry." She turned to him, something rising in her chest, grief, fear, anger, but also something else, recognition. She had lived through storms before, but none like this. And yet, in the eye of it, here he was, the man who left, and the man who returned. "You think this was for you?" she whispered. He hesitated. "I know it was." She closed her eyes, remembering the man with the photo, the message he left at her door. "Then they know where I live, where my son sleeps. This isn't just about you anymore, Jace." "I know," he said again. "That's why I've been trying to end it." She looked at him, really looked at him. He was thinner, exhausted, but something in his eyes had changed. He didn't just look dangerous now. He looked determined. "You shouldn't have come back," she said, though her voice betrayed the truth, that some part of her was glad he did. "I couldn't stay away when I knew you were in danger." She searched his face, heart pounding. "So what happens now?" "I finish this," he said, "and then, if I'm still standing, I come back. For good." Amelia reached for his hand, fingers curling around his, as if anchoring herself. "You already came back," she whispered, "and that's the only reason I'm still breathing." And as the smoke billowed into the night sky, Amelia realized something she hadn't wanted to admit. The man she once feared had become the man she couldn't bear to lose. Chapter 13. A deal with Shadow City's underbelly hadn't changed. Same rusted doors, same smoke-choked stairwells, and men who smiled with dead eyes. Jace walked into the dim-lit lounge beneath the old butcher shop, a ghost returning to haunt the living. Every step was deliberate. Every heartbeat reminded him why he was here. The boss sat at a leather booth in the back, flanked by two muscle-bound shadows who barely looked up. Cigarette smoke curled from the ashtray, mingling with the low thrum of jazz on a dusty speaker. "Well," the boss drawled, his voice sandpaper smooth, "if it isn't the prodigal killer." Jace didn't sit. "It ends tonight." The boss chuckled. "You don't get to decide when it ends, Moretti. I walked away once. I'm not asking this time. You think disappearing for a few weeks and cozying up to some nurse makes you clean?" the man asked, tapping ash onto the table. "You belong to me. You earned that." Jace's jaw flexed. "Then let's make a trade." That got the man's attention. He leaned forward, dark eyes narrowing. "What kind of trade?" "I've been watching your lieutenants. I know who's skimming from the gun shipments. I know which front businesses are leaking heat to the feds. Give me a clean break, no tail. No threats, and I'll give you names. Real ones." The boss's smile faded. "I walk, and I disappear," Jace continued. "You never see me again. I keep your secrets. You keep away from mine." For a long, tense moment, there was nothing but the buzz of the overhead light and the soft creak of leather as the boss leaned back. "You'd sell out your brothers." "They stopped being brothers the night they left me bleeding in the street." The boss studied him, calculating. Then, with a sigh, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small folded slip of paper. He slid it across the table. Names, numbers, safe passage. If I find you've lied, I won't. The man nodded to one of his guards, who moved toward the back room. Jace stood still, his muscles coiled tight, ready for anything. But the deal was struck, bloodless, for once, when Jace stepped out into the cold night air. The weight on his chest didn't lift, but it shifted. For the first time in years, he wasn't looking over his shoulder because someone owned him. He was finally free. But freedom had its price. The burns on his ribs still throbbed. His fists were scraped raw. He'd taken hits getting the intel, traded bruises for silence, and almost bled out again in an alley not unlike the one where Amelia found him. He'd given all he could. Now, he just had to hope it was enough. He boarded the late-night train back to Brooklyn, slumped in the corner seat like any other weary soul. But unlike before, he carried something new with him, not fear, not vengeance. A hope so fragile it felt like glass in his chest. He was going back. Not as a ghost, but as a man ready to be worthy of the woman who saved him. Chapter 14. Safe in her arms. Clinic was quiet. Ash-stained walls had been scrubbed clean, though the faint scent of smoke still lingered in the cracks. Amelia stood in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, stirring a pot of soup she wasn't really hungry for. The radio played low jazz in the background, Noah's footsteps upstairs a soft rhythm overhead. She tried not to look at the door every time it creaked. It had been days since the fire, days since Jace appeared from the shadows, held her face in his hands, and promised to come back for good. But she knew better than to wait for men who made promises with one foot in the past. So when the knock finally came, 3 slow raps, solid and sure, she didn't run to the door. She opened it quietly, cautiously, and there he was. Jace stood in the doorway, not in blood-streaked clothes or pain-glazed eyes, but something else entirely. His face was tired, his body bruised, but his presence filled the threshold like he finally belonged there. He carried no bag, just a folded sheet of paper in one hand. "I'm not running anymore," he said. "It's done." I walked away, and they let me go. Her breath caught. "They don't just let people go, Jace. They did this time, because I made it cost them too much not to." He stepped inside slowly, as if testing whether he still had the right. "I didn't come here to hide. I came because I want a life, one that's real, one I didn't think I deserved until I met you." Amelia closed the door behind him, her hand still on the knob. "You said you weren't the kind of man I could let into my son's life," she said softly. "And you were right." Jace flinched, just slightly, but the man standing in front of me now, her voice trembled. "He's someone I think my son already looks up to, someone I missed more than I wanted to admit." He didn't speak. He didn't need to. She reached up and touched the side of his face, fingers brushing against the new scar above his temple. "You came back," she whispered. "I told you I would." And then she kissed him, not gently this time, not hesitantly. It was a kiss that said, "You survived and I forgive you, and come home." His arms wrapped around her, pulling her into him. He'd been starving for the feeling. Their breaths mingled, warm and rushed, the world narrowing to just the space between them when they pulled apart. Jace rested his forehead against hers. "I don't know how to be anything but broken," he murmured. She cupped his cheek. "Then let me help you learn how to be whole." Later, when Noah came down and saw Jace standing in the kitchen, he didn't ask questions, just nodded, a quiet understanding passing between them. Jace stayed for dinner. He cleared the dishes, he smiled. And that night, when he lay in the spare room now freshly made, warm, he slept for the first time in years without one hand tucked under his pillow, because finally, he was safe, and more importantly, he was loved. Chapter 15. Home is where she waits. Spring arrives softly in Brooklyn, with blossoms blooming stubbornly between cracks in the pavement and sunlight filtering through fire escapes like golden lace. The clinic's new sign gleamed, freshly painted above the door, Hart Family Health. Beneath it, flower boxes overflowed with bright marigolds, planted by Noah and watered each morning by a man who once lived in the dark. Jace stood by the sidewalk, wiping his hands on a rag after fixing the clinic's new security lights. He glanced toward the window, where Amelia was laughing with a patient, her face glowing with ease. It was the kind of laugh that reached her eyes again. She'd let him back in, not just into her home, but into her world. Noah jogged down the steps a moment later, backpack slung over one shoulder and a lopsided grin on his face. "Jace, I got the internship." Jace turned, grinning. "The tech lab downtown." "Yeah, I start next month. Proud of you, kid." Noah hesitated, then gave Jace a quick shoulder bump before disappearing down the block. It wasn't the kind of affection they talked about, but it was real, earned. That evening, the backyard twinkled under strings of fairy lights Amelia had insisted on hanging herself. The table was set with homemade lasagna, garlic bread, and a bottle of red they'd been saving since the day the clinic reopened. Laughter filled the small garden. Friends, neighbors, and a few former patients who had become like family. Jace sat beside Amelia, his hand resting quietly on her knee. She looked over at him, eyes soft, warm. "You know," she said, "I never thought this would be my life." "Me neither," he said, "but it's the first one that feels real." They watched Noah tell a story to a girl from school, his hands animated, voice loud. The clinic lights glowed behind them, casting long, peaceful shadows across the grass. Jace leaned in, whispering, "I used to think love wasn't for people like me, and now," he kissed her temple, "now I think love is what saved me." Amelia rested her head on his shoulder, her hand threading into his. "No one called him a killer here. No one asked about the past. He was just Jace, the man who fixed light bulbs, made strong coffee, and fell in love with a nurse who had every reason to shut him out, but chose, instead, to let him in, and under a canopy of soft lights and second chances, he realized he had found something far rarer than escape. He had found home."